So you're finally getting to the level where you're really just throwing on a ton of things on your camera, like a matte box, rails, audio recording equipment, external batteries, just things like that. Really, when people start to reach that point, the biggest tool that they start to get is cages, and they just go to town rigging it out. So I'm gonna talk to you real quick about some of the benefits of a cage, and I'm also gonna introduce you to the Arcen Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K/6K, which is an affordable cage option for people who are looking to get into this piece of gear. But without further ado, let's get started. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump right into it and talk about why cages actually exist and whether or not it really makes sense for you to purchase one. But if you kind of already know what cages are all about and you don't really care about the technical reasons, go ahead and just click on this timestamp here to go straight to the Arcen review, which is a great cage that I recommend for the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K or 6K. But the first and most obvious reason that you might need a cage is really the fact that you're trying to mount a bunch of different things onto a tiny camera body. See, if you have a big cinema body like an ARRI, a RED, a Sony FS5, FS7, or Ursa, or something like that, those are designed to be a bit more modular and can be configured in ways that make more sense for their shooting scenarios. So say you're shooting a feature-length documentary and you want to rig up a camera to be able to shoot for all hours of the day with a shoulder rig and a big V-mount battery. That's much easier to do on cameras that are more camcorder or ENG style bodies, simply because there's so many first-party ways to do it. It's not the case with something like a mirrorless camera, a DSLR, or these mini cinema cameras that we're using. Problem is you actually have to build out those rigs from all these different manufacturers, and that's where the cage comes in. You can think of it as sort of the heart or the entryway into all these different things, where you can mount magic arms for external monitors, rails for lens supports, cold shoes for audio recording options, external power options. A cage is just a nice solid piece of metal with a bunch of screw holes in it, essentially, that allow you to put as much stuff on the camera as you want. And with us, in our particular shooting scenario, I can't even actually shoot without it, simply because I need to mount my lav receiver, my external power option, and my SSD. The second reason may or may not be a big deal depending on which camera you're shooting with, but it adds an extra level of security and protection, not only absorbing the blow of, say, somebody knocking it over on a tripod or something falling from above on top of it, or just general impacts when it's flying around in a road case, but it also protects your cables and the ports originally attached to your camera. Say, for instance, you're quickly attaching and reattaching quick release plates, or you're mounting things on the bottom of it. All of those just continually put wear and tear on the camera and start to really strip away at the threads. This is sort of an in-between to where if you're actually mounting all those accessories over and over again, you could just replace the cage, which is far more cheaper than having to send your camera in for weeks at a time and getting it repaired or replacing those 1/4-inch threads. And then finally, it also really helps when you're doing cable inputs, especially when you have a lot of inexpensive cameras. A lot of very low-tier DSLRs or mid-tier DSLRs were not designed for continuous professional use. And if you're, say, unplugging and replugging in an HDMI cable or a USB cable over and over again, eventually that will fail. But luckily, third-party manufacturers have remedied this, for instance, with a go-between cable that sits in between your cage and the actual input. Things like this, for instance, also prevent accidental disconnects. Just really provides that much extra level of, not having to worry about the headaches that come with all these other things from just it floating there, essentially, which is a huge liability. And if I was doing a day rate shoot as a DP, I'm not even gonna risk it. And the last reason, I know it sounds kind of like a joke, but really it does add some degree of credibility to your shoots depending on the client. Because let's face it, people out there who don't know anything about the media industry think big, flashy, expensive, metallic, those types of cameras are the real deal. And throw things on there that you normally wouldn't, and I'll guarantee you that you'll get far more reactions from people out there when you're doing like B2B or B2C clients who just don't have any relation to the media industry. They eat that up, throw a matte box on there, start slating for a 1-camera shoot, put a bunch of lights on there, an external monitor, just a ton of things on there, really rig it out, and people will just think it's impressive, even though it really doesn't actually either help you, or chances are you might not even be utilizing it to the full extent that you possibly could. But If you're working with a crew that does understand media things, it's not gonna apply to you. Everybody on set's gonna know what a cage does, and throwing more unnecessary things on there is just extra work for you. This is only really for the people who don't know anything about the work you actually do. So now let's talk about the Arcen Cage for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K/4K. And what I really like about this is that it's just very inexpensive, because let's be honest, a cage isn't really that complex of a piece of filmmaking gear, and I get it, some things in this industry are just very overpriced, and I really think cages fall into that category simply because they're just a milled piece of metal, and that's it, with some screw threads. For my particular work style, I'm just looking to add more things securely on my cage, and the Arcen Cage does that about as perfect as you'd expect. But on the plus side, I love how they do have a magnetic Allen key built into the cage, and I wish every manufacturer would just mirror this across the board in all of their products. Other than that, there's really not much to say about it. It includes all the things you would normally get if you bought a regular cheese plate or a regular cage, and it just feels secure, and the build quality feels great for a $50 cage. I'd very much recommend it if you're looking for something that's a bit more cheaper than the small rig full option, which runs about $100. And if you're even contemplating something like the tilted cage, you're in a whole different ballpark than something like this. But we want to know what you think. Are you really somebody who sees the value in these super high-end, like, you know, Tilta luxury cages with a lot of like smart features and battery options that, honestly, I mean, we use a 12-volt converter to power our 6K via NP batteries on top, and it works just fine, but I feel like the Tilta would obviously be a lot more elegant and pretty to look at, but I don't really mind a bunch of cables lying around. To each their own. Or are you somebody who's on the other side of this, who really just needs something that gets the job done and doesn't really want to spend a ton of money for a fancier piece of metal? As always, hit up the comment section below with what you think or what gear you're rocking out on your shoots today. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms for the latest news in the industry and what cool things we're doing out there on set. Make sure to also check out skyfeatherstudios.com for more detailed information, workshops, tutorials, and way more in the media industry. And as always, we'll see you next time.